3 months and 4,000 miles into owning this 2013 Porsche Cayenne 958. It's the 3-litre diesel, and so far it's been an absolutely lovely car. In fact, it's a nicer car than I thought I'd find myself in, and I've been really enjoying the comfort of daily driving it. It recently took us on a family road trip to Germany, and to transport my folks such distances in such luxury was actually a privilege. It's a very nicely spec'd example in seemingly great condition, and I have noticed a couple of quirks it has, but other than that, it's been generally faultless. I actually felt like I bought really well, which was a relief because I know these cars can be quite bankrupting if you get a bad one. If you've clicked on this video, however, you'll already know that things might be taking a turn for the worse. Maybe you're in a similar position to me, and maybe the dream is about to turn into a nightmare. Recently, the car started giving me this check coolant level warning on the dash. I didn't actually read too much into it at first because the car leaves no puddles on the drive and there's no evidence of a leak that I can see either. However, a couple of 100 miles later, the warning came back, and checking the reservoir, it was quite a bit lower than last time. By the time I topped it back up with deionized water, it had taken 1.7 litres. A car losing 1.7 litres of coolant over the course of a couple of 100 miles is definitely cause for concern. It definitely sounds like something to worry about on a car like this, and to me they actually sound like the symptoms of a blown head gasket, which is a very daunting prospect indeed. Although the engine does run sweet and there are no other symptoms of a head gasket failure, no white smoke coming out the back or anything like that. But we're a couple of weeks later now, and the coolant loss seems to be accelerating to me, and I'm topping it up maybe around 1 litre a week. So it's time to take action. Coolant reservoir is hidden just underneath this cover. So it looks like it's used at least 1 litre over the last week or so. You can see the pink level is way below the min there. Those of you who know about these cars will know this 3-litre V6 TDI is actually a VAG group engine, and it's also found in Audi Q7, Volkswagen Touareg and various other VAG products. This was actually one of my main reasons for picking up this type of Cayenne. There should be lots of knowledge online, and I should be able to cross-reference parts rather than paying Porsche dealership prices. Let's hope that turns out to be the case. These engines are very well regarded, and they are actually known to rack up huge mileage without issue. However, they aren't completely without issue. The cooling system is one of the weak points, and that's largely to do with inaccessible plastic cooling components and seals which fatigue over time. And with this Cayenne being 10 years old and with 130,000 miles on the clock, I'm beginning to worry that I've set myself up for a bad time here. From the research I've done online, my symptoms seem to be pointing to a very common coolant leak in the valley of the V6 engine. That's actually another potentially daunting repair, but obviously it's much more favourable than head gaskets. For clarity, there are 2 banks of 3 cylinders in the V6 engine, and there's a valley in the middle. It's completely hidden by the intake manifold right now, and of course various other items that are in the way. But in that V, there are components that flow coolant, such as an EGR cooler. If the valley is turned into a coolant swimming pool, we'll know we have a fairly big job ahead of us to fix it, although it should be doable. Annoyingly though, it's all packaged so tight you can't really see into the valley, and there's more than one potential source of the leaking in this area. So either way, we're going to need to take this manifold off for a better look. Before I start stripping all this off to get access to removing that manifold, I'm just going to take off the 2 plastic vanity covers from the side. I'll probably leave the middle one on because it's actually a convenient place to store tools, but I'll put a cover over it so I don't damage that. with those out of the way, I think I'm going to start off by trying to take off this intake pipe where the EGR also runs into it. Having a look around, it seems like most of the fasteners are T30, so you're definitely going to need your Torx bits for this. There are also some Allen heads, and there's some 5mm here, including those. I don't know the names specifically of everything here. I'm a BMW guy, so this is all quite new to me, so bear with me. But you're going to see me taking it off, and I will speak about any pitfalls afterwards and try to explain it to you. I'm hoping I'm going to be making the video I wish I'd found when I was doing this. Easy after that. Bloody hell, that's sooty. Bloody hell, it's going to be a performance upgrade when I clean out this pipe and throttle body. So now that intake pipe's off and the throttle body as well, the next thing to turn our attention to is the cabling and all the plugs here. They all need disconnecting and kind of tucking over to one side. The only thing that's looking concerning there is a hard fuel line that looks like it's going to be in the way. We'll have to see how we go with that. But while we're at this point, I think I should just mention how unbelievably dirty the intake is on this car. As I mentioned earlier, 130,000 miles, and my God, it's going to run a lot better once I've cleaned this out. So even if you're not investigating a coolant leak, I think I can recommend taking this off and cleaning it out. This whole thing is going to be full like that. I remember when I switched the exhaust tips, you may have seen the previous video, I commented on how clean the exhaust looks. When you look into the back box, it's still shiny and stainless in there. This is obviously where all the soot is going. This is completely down to the emission systems on these modern diesels, even though this is 10 years old. A newer one, I can't even imagine. It probably, well, they don't really make them anymore, do they? Now, looking at this, I'm seriously thinking about whether I should be doing some kind of EGR delete on this car. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. We'll continue taking this manifold off. that. Well, I've cleared as much as I can now, and I'm sure I'll find something else yet, but it looks like we can start having to go at the 12 Torx screws that actually hold this plastic manifold on. So that's what we're going to do now. I'm never lifting that screw out of there, so let's hope it doesn't fall into the intake. Let's hope it's undone. So it's loose and moving now, but we've come to the hard line, which it seems to me to be the only thing holding it in. It's connected to another hard line which isn't holding it in with this bracket with a 10mm. So I'll take that out and then we'll probably be trying to remove this hard line at either end and lift it out. It's a fuel line, so it might get messy this. How anticlimactic. Where's the fuel pressure? Good though. Looks like we've got a pinch point between these two things. I'm not really sure what this sensor is, probably fuel pressure sensor, but it looks like the easiest one to take out because this one seems to be on like non-reusable clamps. So I'm going to try and give this a turn. I haven't got a spanner, so I'm using an adjustable. Slight change of plan because we can't seem to get this to budge and it's starting to round off now. It seems to be quite similar to those crappy wheel nuts that Ford used back in the early 2000s, you know, where it's got a skin on it which just gives up on you. So before we completely destroy this, we're going to move on to plan B, which is to just take out this fuel rail or take the bolts out of it so it can be pulled aside slightly, which brings us to our third strange type of fastenings, which are triple square. These are M10 triple square. In other words, it's a spline drive, which is quite often what it's called. Not tight. So that's the intake manifold off. As you saw, undoing the fuel lines and just pulling the fuel rail aside did work to give me the space to get this corner out. But I'd definitely recommend, if you're doing it yourself, you get a 27mm deep socket to remove this fuel pressure sensor. I assume that's what it is, because your life will be easier to remove that instead if you've got the right tools. Now, another thing to note is, even without all the fasteners undone, this was a real wrestle to take out, much more than I anticipated, and I felt like I was going to break it on a couple of occasions. One of the things that makes it difficult is there are plastic dowels on the underside of this that locate it square on top of the heads. Now, you want to make sure you've lifted it up 1/2 centimetre and then you're pulling it out this way, because there's no other way to do it really. One of your issues is you've got fuel lines and electrical cables running over this corner and a bit on the back as well, which you need to get unhooked from over this pin, which is what the engine cover sits onto. And they're quite taut, so you have to give them a bit of a stretch to get them over the top. But you'll get there in the end if you persist. Just take your time with it and it'll come off like-minded. With the manifold off, I've quickly put some tissue into the intake runners just to make sure nothing falls down there, making this job much bigger than it already is. So the next thing to do is remove this, which is the EGR cooler. It's simply held on by 4 Torx-headed screws. However, you've got to be mindful that there's the exhaust pipe that goes into it, there's a coolant pipe here, coolant pipe down there, which is a plastic flange, which is a notorious leaking area. And of course this one, which we already removed, we don't need to worry about that. Lots of vacuum lines and sensors to worry about too. Can't possibly explain what they do to you, but we need to be mindful and make sure we've undone them. Then this should lift out. Now I can already see around it, and there's definitely coolant in the valley. So we're on the right track, which I suppose is a good thing. Here's the part where you start to question whether you should have drained the coolant, because the pink level in the reservoir is higher up than all of this still. I'm going to try and take this pipe off and we'll find out if I should have drained the coolant or not as we go. So with the EGR cooler now off, we've found our first smoking gun of the strip down, which is the end of this flange is broken off and still stuck in the EGR cooler. This is actually a very well-known problem, and it can often break when you're taking these out. This one looks like it's been broken for a long time, so it might actually be the main reason I have a coolant leak in the valley. I am convinced that hasn't just broken now. It's stained with coolant, looks like it's been broken for a long time, and of course the O-ring would sit right around it, sealing it against the inside of this. So this has got to be at least a main contributing factor to the leak. And on the engine side you can see it would have sat on there. This whole plastic part is removable and replaceable, so luckily that should be a nice easy fix. If it's just that, we'll be very lucky, but there's a very good chance there will be other leaks in this area. The next thing I want to do is to remove this oil cooler. Underneath it there's a seal which can also be a cause of leaks, but look at the swimming pool I've got going on, and if you look at the high water mark, it looks like it's been twice as deep. Before I go ahead and start trying to undo that oil cooler, my first job is to try and suck some of that coolant out. I'm a bit cautious about coolant potentially mixing with oil, so I've got my wet and dry vac. First time I've ever used it wet actually. Let's see what we can do without scratching the car. I'm gobsmacked by how quick that just removed all that coolant. I will link to this in the description. This is a hell of a piece of equipment. That's a disaster. Well, I got away with not draining the coolant. I didn't get away with not draining the oil. Where I had a relatively small pool of coolant, I now have a massive pool of oil in the valley of the engine. I'm going to use this tool to hopefully suck it out and get rid of it, but that was less than ideal. I've created work. With the oil swimming pool now drained again, I'm going to next turn my attention to this plastic part, which seems to be a valve relating to the flow of coolant through the EGR cooler that we removed. After that, I'm going to whip off this base plate, which is the thing that the oil cooler actually was sat on top of. When I do that, no doubt we'll have another tidal surge of black gold, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Getting that bottom plate out was fairly painless actually, and it's revealed deeper into the V here where I can see there's some nasty dried coolant which I'm going to try and extract with the vacuum cleaner, being careful not to let it drop into any of the oil or coolant galleries like that bit just did. So that's the valley of the engine cleaned out, and to be honest it's looking spick and span now. We've got all of the dried coolant out and it's looking good, and of course all the parts are removed, so we've got a really good view into there. But we've reached a critical moment in this process, a moment that's going to tell us whether there's as much work to do again or whether we're going to be on the descent. The determining factor is this pipe cum cover here, plastic thing. So this is actually bolted onto the back of the front plate of the engine. The front plate goes down all the way down the front of the engine. It's where the water pump is situated, and it's behind all the pulleys. So if this is split and leaking coolant and the source of your swimming pool, then you are in for a big job. You have to take the front cover off the engine to take this off, and that's because there is a pipe that passes into the block backwards here, and there's also a torque screw in there that you'd never get off without removing this front plate of the engine. Looking at mine, there are no cracks in it. There don't appear to be any obvious leaks around it or streams of coolant. I think mine's actually good, which is a massive relief. Looking at this EGR cooler bypass valve, this actually looks sound. There's a bit of discoloration on it, but definitely no leaks or cracks. So I'm ruling that out. I'll probably reuse that. Which leaves us with this, the only obviously broken thing that I found. It's the flange that feeds coolant into this EGR. If you remember, we found the end of it broken off in there. It's a very, very common problem. It looks like I am a victim of this as well. Another common cause of leaks is the oil cooler. This one though, doesn't look like any of the seals have failed, so it seems sound. Looking at the base plate for it, the seals are obviously very, very flat, so they definitely need replacing, but nothing you wouldn't expect, and no real obvious signs of a leak either. From here, I'm going to order my new parts, get myself a new flange, and get myself a full seal kit, including the seals for the intake manifold. I'm also going to try and clean that intake manifold out and get rid of all that gunk, and hopefully that'll improve performance too. Now, worth bearing in mind, if you are paying a garage to do this, I am around 8 hours or more into this job so far. They're definitely going to recommend replacing all the potential problem parts in one go, which will add significantly to the bill. But as you'll have already spent a lot of money in their time, you probably should seriously consider that while they're at it. I, however, am prepared to take that risk. Now, if you're interested to see how this works out, please make sure you subscribe, because in the next instalment I'm going to be putting this all back together and we can see if it actually works out for me. But if this video has been helpful to you, do make sure you leave us a like. Thank you very much for watching.